Missan, who has been a very, very busy man over the past few years. If you haven't heard of Missan, you will be now, because you will have seen him explode in the photography scene, the filmmaking scene, the art world, in activism, and in diversity and inclusion. And I think what's fascinating speaking to you in 2022, that Missan actually only picked up a camera in 2017 and started a whole new world. He's become one of the leading lensmen of our time. And he's also been hailed as the most talked about photographer of our times by the Evening Standard. So, Missan, where to start? Because there is so much to cover. You obviously exploded onto the scene during Black Lives Matter, and I think we have to revisit, even though we were in a beautiful conference room talking about luxury and retail, we're obviously in the backdrop of a world that has seen so much fracture and discombobulation in every turn of life. Where did that journey begin for you? And tell us a little bit about those days of the Black Lives Matter protests.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and happy birthday again.
Thank you.
Gosh, summer 2020. I just had my second daughter, Lyra, and was drowning in absolute crushing anxiety of a world that was seemingly burning in front of my very eyes. And then I saw somebody that looked like me cry out to his mother in his own pee as he was dying by the very police force that is designed to protect him. And I looked to my wife and I said, I have no more tears. My well is dry. What do I do? She's a very pragmatic Swedish lady, and she said, look to your camera. And I picked up my camera and I went down to Hyde Park, not knowing whether I would see 5 people or 5,000. And I started shooting my own trauma. And over a period of 3 or 4 weeks, I did what I always did, is take the pictures and put them on Instagram. And I remember waking up one morning and I literally couldn't open my phone because the notifications were going mad. And the son of Martin Luther King, I say this is my life, it's crazy, had found one of my images. And let me preface that by saying the reason I fell in love with photography was as a 7-year-old at school. I saw an image taken by Manita Sleet Jr. of Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther Jr.'s mother, a picture of her in his father's funeral, holding on to Bernice, and somehow looking graceful at the funeral of her assassinated husband. And now you're telling me, in the summer of 2020, the son of Martin Luther King decides that the images that I took in London speak truth to what his father had always dreamed of. And then it went nuts. All the Kardashians and Kanyes of the world, it just went bonkers. And then the editor-in-chief of British Vogue, Edward Enninful, who I did not know at the time, saw the images and decided that I was the lens that needed to tell the story of the bravest cover that I think Condé Nast has ever dared to do. And I photographed 18 activists in a very short period of time with Marcus Rashford on the cover and Ado Oboa on the cover with him. And all of that happened because I needed to do something about the traumas that were kind of climbing out of me. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people of color, and I want to be really clear about this, you know, after George Floyd was murdered, we realized we weren't as okay as we thought. There's that term, code switching. And I think that video just broke us. And even the most successful people with diverse voices were a little bit lost.
Did you expect the images as you were taking them? Could you have any idea or foresee the level of impact? Like if you look at the Darcy Bourne image of why is ending racism a debate, I'm sure that everyone is very familiar with that image. Did you know at the time you were taking that shot that it would become sort of the widest civil rights shared image of all time currently?
No, I mean, I grew up worshipping Gordon Parks, and come on. I mean, that is literally the most shared civil rights image of the digital age. How does one even think that's going to happen?
Can't predict.
And Darcy, who's, talking about, a modern Britain, she is a field hockey player for Great Britain, and somebody, if you look at the image, of paint's drying, because, she had an argument with her parents who said she shouldn't go. And she still went and decided to write that on the tube on the way to the US Embassy, of all places. And if she had missed her train or whatever, it was just that moment, lightning in a bottle moment, where I met her on the streets and we composed something that has been etched into history.
And that image also moved from what was known as reportage into an actual art form, because some of your images very rarely, and Missan obviously straddles kind of the activism, the reportage, and the art world, which is incredibly rare, was actually taken to auction and received double estimate at the time. How did it feel to be in an auction house?
I mean, Sotheby's know what they're doing. And all of this has happened to me when life's beaten me enough to know what I need to do with the platform that I have now. So it was a way for me to raise money for the Anthony Nolan Trust. Not enough people of color have registered. And if you have a blood cancer and you don't find a match, it is a just singular death sentence. And I was like, let me use my pictures to get people to do that. So all of the proceeds of that sale went to the Anthony Nolan Trust.
It's an incredible project. And in terms of going back to Vogue, obviously 104 years history of a publication house and the first black man to shoot the cover. I mean, Edward Enninful has called Missan the voice that was missing. And obviously with great honor comes also great pressure. Have you found a change in the way that you look at your image, having now been that iconic September cover? Do you feel a pressure of that image?
No, not at all. I think the major point of how that happened is that's what happens when you put someone, Edward is a queer black man that is the most powerful man in the fashion industry as we speak. And he was in a powerful enough position to make a decision that few would have. And off the back of that decision, he was put on the cover of Time magazine, which doesn't really happen for fashion editors. So it's for those in the room, I think that's a great example of what happens when you have a diverse voice in a position of actual power. And he put me into a room, he led me into a room that once I got into that room, I realized there's a lot of real estate there. And my motto is, as I climb, I must lift others into the room. When I brought my team, to Manchester United, to Manchester, to Marcus Rashford's garden, he was incredibly shocked because I had predominantly black team, and he's like, he's never seen anything like that.
And you've been known to take obviously lots of different people to events with you to bring them up through the creative ranks as well. And in terms of actually your role in the art world, you've also taken on a very prolific role since that time as chair of the South Bank Centre, which is obviously very pivotal in the way that it's shifting culture and the way we see culture. What are your aims in your new role there, and what do you want to see changing in the way that arts and culture have conversations with brands and with business?
Well, I think when I got the call from the headhunter, I was in my kitchen, and I thought, this guy must be drunk. I was like, what are you, and my wife, again, looked at me and said, yeah, but that place is the physical embodiment of everything you're fighting for. Art and culture for all. I mean, it was set up as a tonic for the nation in the Festival of Britain. And I don't know if I'll ever be more proud of anything I'll do in my life than overseeing 18 acres of London that give you the kind of experience that money can't buy. I remember being there on a Saturday, and we had a Mao, the giant puppet, and then the National brought out the war horse, and all these kids were looking, and I could just see this sense of possibility in everyone that was there, experiencing what culture is. Culture is the only thing that I know of, art culture, that Homo sapiens do that set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. It's our magic, if you like, and we need it now more than ever before. So it's to sit and oversee South Bank and the Hayward and Royal Festival Hall, the skate park, which to me is as important a cultural location as the Royal Festival Hall, is a great, great honor. And how we interface and work with brands, companies like Chanel and Yana, she's not here, but we work closely with her and the Hayward. We have Grace Jones coming for Meltdown, and I can't think of many people alive that interface style, fashion, and purpose as much as Grace. Yeah. And of course, it is where Michelle Obama chose to be received when she came here for the Becoming Tour.
It's an incredibly iconic centre. And in terms of, obviously, what happened over lockdown and the fracture that happened, the image making, there was such a shift in the way that we view images, the way we disseminate imagery. You mentioned about arts and culture and the importance of it. It was one of the only disciplines, I think, during lockdown that actually managed to transcend everything. We saw art galleries going digital. We saw images like yourselves being put out on social media. So when you think about that image making, what have you seen shift? We were talking the other day about Gen Z and the way they put out images, how that's changed from a traditional luxury or a brand space to how it's being used now.
I think the age of perceived perfection is gone. That whole influencer culture pre-COVID is it's BS, it's gone. None of us in this room are okay, we can't be. You know, this is the first time I can think of since the Second World War where all of us, regardless of class or race, have been through collective trauma. And, you know, brands, luxury and otherwise, have to recognize that they're speaking to a consumer base that needs to be seen and heard. And, you know, Gen Z and how images are used in conversation with consumer products has to tap into that. A great example is I'm an ambassador for a camera company called Leica. And, you know, they're a real luxury item, costs more than many cars, each lens even. And, you know, I said, look, if I'm going to work with you, we have to be intentional with the story that we're trying to tell. And if you ever have time, go on YouTube and watch. You know, I launched one of the most important cameras, the Leica Q monochrome. And it's a 2.5-minute video that is me, what I stand for. And to have a pretty conservative, family-owned German luxury brand really take a brave step and have a point of view in this world is really, really important. And there's a great quote for a lot of brands that are here listening by Rumi, which goes, "Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder." And I think this is a really interesting use of understanding how purposeful your conversation needs to be with a consumer base, regardless of their wealth, that is pretty vulnerable right now.
And when you look at how image making is used, how can some of the companies and individuals in this room, how can they actually look? We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, and it's been really positive seeing new roles come about in corporates that are specifically targeting diversity and inclusion. Do you think those roles are working? How can we make it the best possible process?
I'll just be real. I'm looking here. I've seen Jamila. There's another black woman there. I don't even know if there's another black man in this room. There's this term that does my nut in called performative allyship. And that's when I get, you know, offered all sorts of things to be associated with luxury brands, automobile companies and beyond. And I always ask them to look at the leadership and all the way down the exec. And then I spend time with the head of HR. And I understand how he or she goes about hiring people. And I believe we all have a huge amount of work to do for it to not be performative. You know, the fact that I can't see anyone that looks like me or barely can here says that everyone here needs to think about what conversation we're having. I know plenty of people that look like me in luxury. We need to find them and make sure they are seen and given a voice. Empathy is the greatest weapon that I know, and the other one is vulnerability. And I think if we can marry those two with how we hire and put a little bit of boldness in as well and look for people that have a different lived experience. But, you know, race and racism is one thing, but unconscious bias is a far bigger thing. If you've had a specific lived experience your whole life, it doesn't make you a racist. It just means that you may be more comfortable making a quick decision with folks that you know.
Well, you've been very open about your own experience of growing up in terms of where you were born and how you've grown up and schooled, etc. Do you feel like that has helped your conversation?
Massively. I mean, I was raised as a very privileged white boy. You know, I went from I was boarding at 5 in England all the way through. And it's been fascinating watching many of my friends that I went to the same schooling system as me kind of float through so many opportunities that it's not their fault.
Yeah.
You know, they've had relatives that can get them internships here, there, and everywhere, and they're running hedge funds or editors-in-chiefs in places, whereas as a person of color, mentoring, and I go into the prison system at least once a month and youth centers, I just see the lack of opportunities. I'll give you some interesting stats. I was with Sir Johnny Ive recently at the Royal College of Art, and you know, he said, "Oh, Miss Anne, I can't spell like you. I can't spell. I'm very neurodiverse. I failed every exam I ever took." And you know, in Wandsworth Prison, I think 80% of the intake are considered neurodiverse, and 80% of the intake of the Royal College of Art are considered neurodiverse. So just figure that out.
Creativity.
You know,
So
there are many Picassos and Miles Davises and Nina Simones that have lost the lottery of life, and they are in places that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And you know, I'm dedicated to making sure we don't replicate those mistakes at a scale that probably hasn't been done before.
And you're unusually, obviously your images as an artist and a photographer have become so globally known, but you are also a businessman and a creative cultural producer and commentator, and you have your own company, What We See. What do you see the role? Tell us first of all what We See is, and what is the role of What We See?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years ago, I was really getting concerned by what I call the weaponization of mediocrity. So algorithmically infused crap that we were normalizing, you know. As I live in the countryside and I would commute and I would look over seemingly erudite gentlemen that were on their phones and looking at things that you would expect them to read, and as they got bored, they would switch on to the Daily Mail, and I found that really, really interesting. And I've realized that in general, it's not about having bad taste. I think most people will be moved by powerful art. It's about not knowing where to look and not having the time to even think to look. So I wanted to create a media business that was the curated experience that I believe the internet was always supposed to be, and showcase the very best of film, music, art, culture, activism, all in one place. And what we see has been, you know, we've been very lucky to survive with, you know, budgets going down with many agencies and direct relationships with brands, but we've also innovated. You know, one of our new outposts is called Culture 3, which is, you know, our Web3 product. And as somebody who is a hardcore gamer, I'm a PFP degen and the largest crypto art collector of African art in the world, I'm really excited about smart contract-enabled possibility. And what I mean by that is that when you say NFTs, people think about pixelated monkeys. I think about how we were able to raise over £1 million in 3 minutes to support African and Asian students that couldn't get across the border in Ukraine. I think about the Muslim women in the north of Nigeria that are taking iPhone photographs that are better than things I'm seeing in Vogue.
Yeah.
That are risking their life to dare to have a point of view. None of those people will have a chance of meeting a fancy curator in New York or London, but why shouldn't they be artists? So the democratization of merit-based opportunity enabled by smart contract technology is a revolutionary act in itself.
And you talk a lot about the liquidity and the spreading of that message through NFTs. And you've gone on to my next topic, actually, which is Tezos, which is unusually you've been put in charge of a collection to build Asian and African NFT artists, which I think is really unusual. I work currently in the art market, and that side of it has not been explored. So in effect, would you say that you're looking at diversity and activism in the NFT space through what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, look, Arthur and Kathleen Brightman You know, I love it when people really walk it. You know, they've
Yeah.
made untold wealth from creating the third largest blockchain, the greenest, cleanest blockchain. And, you know, over dinner, an idea became something more. And, you know, I'm the first curator of the world's first blockchain partnership with a cultural leader, where I will be acquiring works globally of fine crypto art. And for me, it gives me the liquidity to absolutely change lives. It's just so important for people to feel seen, especially in this age now. If you look at the, I hate to bring this up, but the suicide rate from 18 to 28-year-olds is the highest it's ever been. These stats have been collected. I think people don't quite realize how high the stakes are in leaning in to many, many people that don't feel they're okay. And brands have that responsibility too. They really, really do. I don't think because you are wealthy and can afford something that's luxurious, that means you're okay. There's no correlation with wealth and mental.
Yeah.
You know, mental.
Well, there's such a proven link, isn't there, between arts and health? And
Yes.
I think to date it's always been very qualitative and making you feel good and looking good at beautiful images. But as we know, quantitatively through social prescriptioning and apps, it's changing ever so quickly, in which you're having a very direct impact. So what do you see the role of a curator as being? Because you are actually, it's very rare to curate an NFT collection. And how do you actually how are you physically doing it?
I think the reason I wanted me to be the first one, I have a year, is I needed to make the blueprint to make sure those that are in Nicaragua, in all over Southeast Asia, in Lagos, in Caracas, are being seen. Because in even the traditional art world, and definitely the crypto art world, I was seeing a mainland Europe and North American point of view. And that's not the world. There's a lot more to be seen and heard. So I knew that if it was me, I could leave the breadcrumbs of what it means to be truly inclusive while celebrating everyone's great ability. So that's why I kind of hoped they would let me do it first, and people could follow suit afterwards.
Well, I'm very excited to see what you put in there. And actually, I want to know, what's your most recent thing you've put in your wallet?
Iranian artists are being they're being delisted because of sanctions against Iran, which is a real tragedy, because some of the best art I've seen in the last 6 months at least have all really come out of Iran. So Tezos doesn't have those limitations. And I just recently collected an Iranian artist who's anonymous. He or she is known as C3, and it's AI-generated work that conjures up a kind of, Middle Eastern, Afro-futuristic view of the world that I never really saw as a kid.
Amazing.
You know, I was kind of stuck with Luke Skywalker and Marty McFly, which is nice, but it's nice to see something a little bit different.
And will you be collecting some Nigerian artists?
Of course. Yeah, I
Yeah?
mean, we'll be broadly collecting, but it's just, I will make sure those that are usually omitted are not.
The share of voice.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to say, whilst I have all of you, is, I think that brands going forward are going to realize that they have to be storytellers first and product sellers second. And I'm beginning to see already some really interesting campaigns. But if you were to ask me, as chair of a cultural institution and a creator myself, how are luxury brands going to be relevant? And you really have to think of that word relevant, because if people don't get seen long enough, they build their own markets or find their own places where they do get seen. And the late, great Virgil Abloh spoke very openly about Off-White and what he brought to the fashion industry, because he never saw himself. And I really think, I'll finish with this, to everyone in this room, what do you do with the time you have? Life can be fleeting, and in your jobs, you have power, you have equity. And I would like you to infuse what you do with the job and the time you have with a sense of purpose and empathy. And I think your existing customers won't be shocked, and you may have a whole new collector base. If you look at the fastest growing middle class on earth, it is people of color. India and Africa is coming, and they, luxury, 90% of the real money spent is on aspirational, and we need to be seen. So hopefully you'll continue or begin to have that conversation in earnest.
Well, I think that's quite a good way to wrap that chat. But I think the one thing I wanted to ask you is, with your images, what would be the lasting message, particularly from the Black Lives Matter protest images and your image making as a whole, that you would like people to take away?
I partnered with Ocean Outdoor, and good on them. And they allowed me to take over the whole of Piccadilly Circus, all of it, the lights, for I think 3 weeks. And I went a few times, and so many people recognized me, it was odd. So I went really early one morning, and it was empty, it was extraordinary. I just stood there looking at my images and on the lights of Piccadilly. And then I saw this red-haired young woman recognize me, and she came up and she was like, "Hi, you're the photographer?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "We've come from Scotland." And I was like, "That's amazing." And she goes, "I'm here with my dad." I was like, "Oh, that's great." She goes, "He's racist." And I was like, "Okay." and she calls the man over. And this big, burly man realized I was the person that took the picture. And I realized that he had been crying, the father. And I was like, oh. So I said, "Look, what are these pictures making you feel?" And he looks at me, and then he looks back up, and with tears still kind of falling, and he says, "I feel the pain of others. I feel the pain of others." And I realized that this man must have been raised by parents in Scotland that had a very particular worldview, and he had this beautiful daughter who somehow, even though she was raised by someone that had a very linear version of the world, she unlearned it. Regardless of the unconditional love she had for her father, she said, "Dad, you're wrong." And she went out and saw the world in Technicolor. And to see her father in later life recognize that sometimes being fearful of something that's different isn't the way, through looking at my pictures that was born out of my own trauma and dealing with the George Floyd and COVID of it all, was an extraordinary thing. So the answer to your question is my images hopefully make you stop and think about the work you have to do inward so you can look outwards.
Thank you very much. And Miss, I want to thank you as well, because you always share so intimately as an amazing translator of all your experiences. Every time I speak to you, there's a new one that I haven't heard. So personal thank you as well, because I know it's given me confidence in the art world and diversity and inclusion conversation. And I think we all know it's a very complex and sensitive conversation, but it's an absolutely vital one. So thank you all for listening today, and thank you very much, Miss Anne.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.